So what a treat to have you here. You must, in this week of IMF World Bank, I'm sure you've got your feet up and just hanging out.
Absolutely, but what a better place to hang out than with all these wonderful women. I've just been listening to Gita, who's I'm a big fan of, and so she's set the scene.
Yeah, she has. So now that she's set the scene, we're going to get right into it. I thought we'd start out with a report card assessment of how you created the Sustainable Development Goals. Where are we right now? How's it looking?
I would love to say that it's looking great, but it isn't. We had a stock take last year, and from where we came, 4 years of trying to shape a response to what the world needed on the development agenda, 15% is a pretty poor score. What I think the good news is that member states took that to heart, and as hard as it was to get a resolution in response, they did say these goals still matter. It's the only framing that you take to the table that people don't argue about today, and we argue about a lot of things. And so therefore, this is the acceleration for the next 6 years. And so I think an acknowledgement that we've not done well, and there are many reasons for that. Many will say to you, the pandemic, COVID, the war in Ukraine, the current conflict we have in Israel and Palestine, Sudan, the Sahel, and many issues will come as why we don't do it. But frankly, before COVID, we were off track. And so important that we pick up the issues of what have pulled us back and not allowed us to lean in to the SDGs, which are so much a part of the response the world has said they need.
I love that you're so honest about the assessment and where we are. You're not blaming COVID. When you're looking to turbocharge these global goals, what will be your focus over the next few years?
So we picked up what people are doing, but just not doing them well enough. I think we recognized that there was a means of implementation gap, which is about not enough finance, not enough access to technology, the trade is unfair, capacity in institutions to lift this agenda, which is quite big. So we acknowledge that these are big pieces, but how could we boil that down to countries and to donors and to the private sector that we need investments for, that they would say, yes, I can invest in that and it will have impact. And we're looking at the food systems, because we all got a big shock on food security when the war in Ukraine happened. We saw how vulnerable we were, and some countries have the capacity to bounce back, others not.
That's right.
So the food systems, it's a huge constituency of people, especially women and young people. Then we thought that has to be powered by connectivity. The era for the digital connectivity is here now, and it's a possibility to leapfrog and not leave people behind. The energy transitions, and it's not just about industrialization and baseload for countries that definitely need that, but it is about going green, and it is about the possibilities of being off-grid because you can go green and connect women. The whole clean cooking that we have struggled for decades can become a reality. And then there are 3 other issues I think are really important. One is education, and we want to transform education systems now. We learned from COVID how many people fell off the radar. But can we deal with the education skills gap? Because there are many who have gone through education, and education not gone through them. We have a bunch of qualified illiterates out there. What are we going to do? You can't tell them that they're not educated, they've got a certificate. So we say, okay, we need to retool, we need to reskill. And it's true, but we've got this fast forward because we can connect to technology. The triple planetary crisis is the context in which we live, but we must be really careful not to stovepipe the development and the climate agenda. They are part of the Sustainable Development Agenda, they're part of the goals come together, but we have to understand that we've got now a home, our living planet, to deal with, and we have to push that 1.5 degree target we have. And last but not least, you can't do this without institutions, people, and that's going to be a really important part of us getting delivery to a social protection floor, so that people are not falling below when there's a shock, and that we're looking at decent jobs. So just sort of boiling it down to those 6 areas of investment has helped us. It's not to the exclusion of, people will say to me, what about women? Well, for me, if you don't design these 6 investments with women as an outcome in their lives, that they are included, they are empowered, they're also participating in the design, then you haven't done the job. Same with human rights and young people.
When you look at financing for development, it remains a significant issue for countries to meet their SDG targets. When you look at developmental financing, what do you find is the most effective way in getting that financing to the right people?
I mean, I think whatever financing that we have had over the last decade, let's just even talk about the last 7 years, invariably we have had sufficient experience to get it to the right people. What's happening now is that it's insufficient in its scale. We are drip feeding right now, and we're not getting ahead of the curve of those, what we're expected to have. I mean, we're just not doing it. It's not big enough, and it's certainly not urgent enough. So, for instance, we're negotiating a debt deal with Zambia. It takes 3 years. Which person in any developed country is going to take 3 years to know whether they can eat tomorrow? I mean, there are serious issues here about how we talk about getting resources to the people. Resources are getting to people, but they're not sufficient. And so therefore, when a taxpayer says, well, why is not this working? This is a whole lot of money that we've given. It's because it's too little too late. And you're not seeing the impact. And you will not until you do what is necessary, $4 to $5 trillion a year to meet the SDGs over the next 6 years.
I love your background, the daughter of a Welsh nurse and a Nigerian herder who is now at the top in the international community. You've come from very humble beginnings to where you are today. It's really remarkable. And you know the importance of policy. You know the importance of funding. There's a $360 billion annual deficit in spending on gender equality measures. Why is this particular funding so important at this moment right now?
I think perhaps if we've got any learnings, is that we actually siloed the spending on women when in fact it's an integral part of every spending. Having been a cabinet minister, I would look at my colleague in the Ministry of Women's Affairs, and I was to be thinking, what argument is she going to make against the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Health and the Minister of Education when they are an integral part of that? And how we pull these figures out, I think matters. So if we can be more expressive about this is the spending across the different sectors and that we're not just siloing it to women alone, then perhaps the Minister of Finance would be more inclined to see this as an investment and not an expenditure. And I think investing in what is clearly a dividend to the other half of society is really important to explain. And our finance ministers are, you know, these are important people that we've been, at least from my experience in Nigeria, we had great finance ministers who were women. And so therefore the budget itself that was presented to the parliament was far more aware of what expenditures needed to be made when. Now that's just the Minister of Finance. I think the place that we're missing for expenditure on women is the parliaments. Parliaments are the ones that appropriate. They appropriate laws, they appropriate spending, and this is where it needs to be at. And so when we look at our representation in parliaments, it's apart from wonderful countries like Rwanda, it's just not there. So we're not being felt. Here, I think civil society can help and really push the boundaries of expenditure in women and girls.
In 2011, I had the opportunity to travel with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to the UN when he tried to push for Palestinian statehood. It didn't happen. 13 years later, now there's going to be a vote on, he didn't manage to get the votes then. He's managed to get votes to bring this up. If the United States vetoes it, the rules are it fails. They need 9 people to move forward. Do you think this is going to happen for the Palestinians? And if it does not, how do we rebuild Gaza? Where do the Palestinians go from here?
I think it's a very difficult decision, and the geopolitical tensions are clear. Never have we been in a more difficult position where my personal feeling is that we've lost our moral compass on Gaza. I think we've lost it on Sudan, in many places where we needed to take decisions that we should have. If they don't get the vote today, they will live to fight another day as they have done for the decades before. And I think what we have to be there is to stand up for people and to continue accompanying them on that journey. Just as we say, don't forget the girls in Afghanistan. It's not over yet. And until they have their rights to everything, education, health, the economy, it's not done. So I think this is another step in a very important journey for the Palestinian people. And we hope that member states will take the right decision.
You said, don't forget the girls. Afghanistan, Boko Haram, you have personally understood living there, the situation of not forgetting the girls. In Israel, they felt it took 50 days for the UN women to acknowledge the rapes, the sexual violence there. Why did it take so long for UN to come forward and acknowledge that?
I don't think that's true. I think that that's just selective media. It didn't take that long for UN women to express their outrage and their concerns. I think everyone was shocked. What happened in Israel on October the 7th should never ever happen again anywhere. And we need to bring back every single hostage. We've had hostages who've come, who have been released, who've come to speak to us in the UN. They speak to the SG frequently. They've spoken to me. We have hostages that I know personally in Nigeria. It's not just our Chibok girls, it's thousands. Thousands we're able to get back, others not. And I think that, you know, the UN as a whole, including UN women, did step up, and they have spoken, and they continue to. So I hope that we can do more, because we should. We need to amplify the voices that come out of the UN. It cannot just be the UN alone. Each and every one in this room is a member of the UN. Your governments are members of the UN. And it's not just the agencies, funds, and programs.
I love your personal story so much, as I mentioned, because you are a testament that no matter where you come from, there's opportunity for people, which I think there's so many people watching at home and here in the room. I came to Washington as a college student, so this city has so much hope for me. What do you say for the young women coming up? This episode on our podcast focused on girls. To the women who in their hearts, the young girls who want to one day become you and Amina Mohammed, what's your advice?
Well, they can become so much better than me. You know?
You've got a pretty impressive background, I will say.
I've been standing on people's shoulders. I was in a conversation with Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and I was thinking, yes, I want to be like her when I grow up. And I've got not much growing up to do, right? And I'm in my 60s. But I think that for every person, you need to open up more spaces. And those spaces, you need to occupy them. And once you occupy them, don't let them go. You've got to stay there and make that place better than when you met it. So I asked myself, you know, as I'm leaving the UN in a couple of years' time, is it better than when I came in? Yes, it is. We have 50% parity with all management positions in the United Nations. 131 offices where we had just men leading. We have 50% that are women, and amazing women. To bring women in every aspect that we can see, you know, whether we're talking about a community of LGBTQI or we're talking about disabilities, indigenous people, all of them are women. And so we need to bring them into that space and occupy it. But dream big, and I think, you know, life is a journey. Every step matters. Make the networks work for you. Today I look back, I'm looking at Geeta, and Geeta has been with me for decades, but, you know, we reconnect all the time. So in that journey, your networks matter, who you pull up as you're walking along, because when you're coming back down again, you're probably going to see them passing you on the way up.
Touché.
And you want to make sure you still have that connection, because everyone needs a touchstone. Kofi Annan used to be mine, Graça Machel is, and so you always go home to say, did I do that right? Even as I am now, I'm still checking, was that right? Did I connect? It's lifelong learning, and it is a continuous fight and effort to try to occupy the spaces that we should have been in a long time ago, but also make sure you keep them. Don't let them go, because it's too easy to get into that space. It's even, you know, it's too easy to lose that space, I should say. Hard to get in, but much more difficult to retain that space. So, yeah.
UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, we're so grateful you could join us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Please welcome back to the stage FP's Diana Marrero.